One of the questions that I got for Crossbow Appreciation Month was whether all feet per second are the same. Is it the same if you're talking about crossbows versus compound bows? Now, for a lot of us, maybe that sounds like a very simple question, very obvious answer, but I can understand why you might get a little bit concerned and a little bit confused about it. Basically, the first thing anybody looks at when they're looking at a new crossbow is the feet per second. That's like the first thing that we're talking about when we look at crossbows. When I first bought this crossbow, 315 feet per second was pretty much top notch back in 2010. It wasn't long before all the manufacturers were hitting the 350 feet per second mark, and now 400 is the new 300. It's basically all the crossbow manufacturers offer a model that reaches 400 feet per second, or at least advertises a 400 feet per second speed. Now we'll start by talking about my crossbow, for example. Bungie here is a 2010 Excalibur Axiom. The Excalibur Axiom is rated at 305 feet per second, and that's what it says right on the side of it. That was the advertised speed. Now, for crossbows, that means that's the maximum speed. You aren't going to exceed that with your crossbow. As a general rule, that's as fast as this crossbow is going to shoot. That, in this case, contemplates an upgraded string, the Fast Flight Flemish string, not the Dynaflight string that it originally came with. It also contemplates a 100 grain, not the 150 grain broadheads. And when you shoot it under those conditions through a chronograph, like I showed you in a previous video, I hit that advertised speed of 305 feet per second exactly one time. And that was with the brace height all the way forward to increase that speed just a little bit more. I only hit 305 feet per second once out of a dozen or so shots through a chronograph. If you've been watching Death by Bungie, you know that by adding all of that sound deadening equipment to it, I've slowed it down considerably. I'll be talking about that more in future videos. I'm going to remove some of that, see which has the greatest effect on speed, and which ones I can live with or take off to reduce vibration and sound and all that. But nonetheless, that speed is affected by all those different factors. If I go back to a 150 grain broadhead, increase arrow weight, all that's going to slow down your crossbow. Now, with everything in place, I'm down to 281 feet per second or so as an average speed coming out of this crossbow. So it's a long ways from the 305 that was advertised. So it's a little bit confusing with crossbows, that feet per second. Yes, that's our maximum. You can expect to shoot close to that with your crossbow on a consistent basis, but when you start to play with things and add different things and don't use exactly the right equipment, that speed will drop a little bit. Sometimes it'll drop an awful lot, like in my case. When it comes to compound bows, that difference can get even more confusing. Compound bows, unlike crossbows, use a speed measurement system called the IBO standard. That stands for the International Bow Hunting Organization. And those bows essentially are tested all with the same specs, unlike crossbows. If you look at one model from your manufacturer and then you look at a different model, even the Ravens, for example, that all shoot really, really fast by old standards and even by today's standards. They have some that shoot at 390 feet per second and some that shoot at 410, 415 feet per second, whatever it is. There's a difference in their levels, in their models. With compound bows, the vertical bows, the IBO standard tests all of them under ideal, exact conditions. Exactly the same conditions and exactly the same specifications. When they test the IBO standards, all of their bows are set to exactly the same specifications. A 70-pound draw weight, a 30-inch draw length, and a 350 grain arrow. So you got a lighter arrow, you've got a 30-inch draw length, which means that it's based on the bow hunter's arms, and the length of their wingspan and all that, but they can draw back a 30-inch bow. And it's a 70-pound pull, in other words, a pretty high level of draw weight. The problem with that is almost nobody who hunts with a compound bow has any of those things. Almost nobody hunts with an arrow as light as 350. When you look at the standard rig for me with a 100 grain broadhead, my arrow is 365 grains. That's what I hunt with. The arrow itself is 265. I had a 100 grain broadhead to it. You're hunting with basically 365 grains. Now again, there we're talking about compound bows, so it's a different arrow setup, I get that, but I just want to point out the difference. So an arrow of 350 grains is kind of on the light side, But that increases the speed and gives the manufacturers a little bit higher rating, and that's the reason they do that. 70-pound draw weight is an awful lot. Most guys shoot with 65 or lower. There are plenty of people who can pull back 70 pounds, but that may not be ideal for your hunting situations to be able to pull it back and not strain while you're pulling back that bow. So that's another factor to consider, that most people don't pull that. Most people are pulling 60 maybe, something like that. And you can hunt with as little as 35-pound draw weight in most states. That combined with the fact that a 30-inch draw length, that's pretty long. One of the guys I was just watching last night, a video here on YouTube of a guy who has an awful lot of whitetail bow hunting food plot type videos, said that his draw length is 27.5 inches. He referred to himself as having short, stubby arms. That may be the case, but unless you have really long arms, unless you're really tall, 30 inches is a stretch. Most people I know are shooting 28 inches, probably, maybe 28.5 for draw length for the compound bow. So a 30-inch draw length is a stretch. When you look at it, each one of these things affects speed. So that IBO standard, when you look at a new bow right on the shelf that's 325 feet per second, a new compound bow, that's when somebody who reaches all of those specs, it might shoot as high as 325 feet per second. The vast majority of people are not going to be able to take that bow home and shoot at 325 feet per second. It's simply not going to happen because they don't meet those physical specifications. Every 10 pounds reduction in draw weight on one of those compound bows reduces the speed of the arrow by 15 to 20 feet per second. So if you take a bow off the shelf from a manufacturer from the shop and it's 70-pound draw weight, and you have them set that up for you at 60 pounds, you've already lost 10 to 15 feet per second just by dropping that draw weight down from 70 to 60 pounds. You also lose about 1.5 feet per second for every 5 grains of arrow weight that you add to your arrow when you are shooting a compound bow. And what does that mean for you? It starts to add up. If you go from 350 grains up to a 425 grain arrow, you're going to drop an awful lot in speed just because of the arrow selection. And again, arrow weight, that makes a difference as to feet per second too. Again, they're testing at 350 feet per second for that IBO standard. Most people might be hunting, for example, with a 425 grain arrow setup and a 425 grain rig. Now you've gone up 75 grains from the 350 to the 425. The problem with that is every 5 grains that you add to the arrow weight will reduce your arrow speed on those compound bows by about 1.5 feet per second. That can add up to, in that scenario, 22 feet per second dropped off just from arrow selection. So you're dropping more than 20 feet per second just by going from a 350 grain to a 425 grain arrow. Draw length is important on arrow speed also. We talked about that. The IBO standard measures it at 30 inches draw length. If the average person's shooting 28 inches for a draw length, you are going to lose approximately 20 feet per second just by going from 30 down to 28 inches of draw length. That can have that much of an impact on speed. Every inch that you take off of that draw length is going to lose for you another 10 feet per second. And don't forget about the little accessories that we put on the bow to quiet it down. Compound bow users do that too, just like I recently did with my crossbow. Remember the string stars? A number of people have commented on how putting things on the strings, like those string stars, yeah, they reduce the vibration. They make the bow a little bit quieter. They make it more pleasant to shoot. But on the other hand, they also slow down your crossbow a little bit. It's the same thing with compound bows. When you add those accessories, you might be dropping 5 or 6 feet per second just by adding little accessories to your string. So if you've done that now, you can see how with a compound bow, it's very easy to get from that advertised speed of 325 feet per second down to 250 feet per second real fast. All of a sudden, you're back in the 250s when you thought that you were buying a bow that was going to put you in the 300s. Now, do not take away any of this as a suggestion that there's a problem with compound bows. That is not what this channel is about. Everybody who watches this channel knows that. I'm not criticizing people with that. In fact, my point is kind of the opposite. Remember that even though the IBO standard measures the feet per second a certain way, and crossbows are not subject to that, even though there's some little difference there, there is one consistency between both of these. And I've said this over and over on this channel. It is not speed that's going to kill animals for you. It's not speed that is going to make you successful. Accuracy is what's going to make you successful as a hunter with a crossbow or with a compound bow. People are successful in the field with 250 feet per second compound bows. They are successful in the field with 400 feet per second, 300 feet per second, 250 feet per second crossbows. I hope you have enjoyed this video, this Crossbow Appreciation Month video. I hope you will subscribe if you haven't done so already, like the Facebook page, and until next time, all hail Bungie!